When you're betrayed by those you sacrificed sleep, career, and trust for, you don't scream. You calculate. He walked away quietly. No scandal, not asking for a single dollar. They thought they had won. But they forgot who he was. A man who turned chaos into order, ruins into an empire. He's no longer a consultant. He's the architect of destruction, their destruction. He's not looking for forgiveness. He's building something new, on the ashes of their lies. They thought he was just a pawn in their game. Mistake. He was the chessboard. And now, everything they built on betrayal is starting to crack. Because if you let a wolf into the pack, don't be surprised when it's gone by morning. Greetings, my dear friend. I am very happy that you are watching my video, and I will be even happier if you subscribe to my channel. This will make me even happier. Let's get started. The steady rhythm of summer rain lashed against the glass walls of Mason Construction's downtown headquarters as Bartholomew Mason paced anxiously across the length of his office. At 49, he had built his dream into the foundation of Seattle's third-largest commercial construction firm. But that dream now hung in a precarious balance. The colossal Cascade Point deal, valued at $200 million, was beginning to fall apart, and with it, the fragile stability of everything he had worked to build. Elsewhere in the city, Adrian Bellamy sat motionless in his office, staring at a resignation letter sitting untouched on his desk. At 35, Adrian had made a name for himself at Westridge Capital, climbing the corporate ladder over 7 years to secure a position as the youngest senior investment director. His specialty? Revitalizing failing companies on the brink of collapse, earning him the nickname the Resurrector within financial circles. His methods weren't conventional. They were bold, hands-on, and unorthodox. He didn't just give advice from afar. He immersed himself in the chaos, becoming part of the solution. "Are you seriously going to quit?" Jackson Torres leaned against the doorframe, his tie slightly crooked after yet another late-night session at the office. As Adrian's trusted second-in-command, Jackson had watched the signs of discontent slowly take root. 7 years is long enough, Adrian muttered, wiping rainwater from his damp hair. It's become predictable. Drop in, fix inefficiencies, apply the same approach, and move on. There's no thrill left. This has nothing to do with Vanessa's dad calling you yesterday, does it? Jackson asked, a knowing look in his eyes. At the mention of Bartholomew Mason, Adrian's expression hardened. Vanessa Mason had been his wife for 3 years. Their connection sparked unexpectedly at a charity event where they were seated next to one another. The chemistry between them had been instantaneous and intense, leading to a whirlwind romance and a private wedding at her family's estate on Bainbridge Island. "If Bartholomew's reaching out personally, it's serious," Adrian admitted, his voice laced with frustration. "Mason Construction is on the brink. They've lost 3 key bids in the last 6 months. And now you're going to rescue your father-in-law's failing business?" Jackson raised an eyebrow, disbelief evident. "The same man who criticized your methods as reckless during your wedding toast?" "I'm not doing this to rescue Bartholomew," Adrian corrected firmly. "I'm stepping in to safeguard the legacy of Vanessa's family. And for the record, Bartholomew didn't ask for help. Vanessa did." 3 hours later, Adrian sat on the leather couch in the Mason family living room, feeling the tension in the air as Bartholomew's rising anger seemed to reverberate throughout the room. Vanessa sat beside him, her hand resting gently on his knee in a silent gesture of support. "No," Bartholomew snapped, slamming his glass of bourbon down with a force that made the room shake. "We don't need anyone coming in here and pretending to fix things." "It's not about meddling, Dad," Vanessa said, her tone calm but firm. "Adrian knows what he's doing. This is what he's good at." "On Wall Street, maybe," Bartholomew scoffed, dismissing her words. "We build real things here. We don't just move numbers around and call that value." "You're losing Cascade Point to Bishop developers," Adrian interjected, his voice steady but pointed. Bartholomew's eyes shot to him, alarmed. That's classified information. I'm thorough, Adrian replied coolly. Bishop's undercutting you by 8%. I've looked at their proposal. They're cutting corners on structural integrity. Give me access to the bid data, and I'll show you. The room fell into an oppressive silence, broken only by the distant ticking of the grandfather clock near the window. After a tense moment, Bartholomew's voice came out, rough and reluctant. 1 month. You're a consultant, no executive authority. 3 months, Adrian countered. As chief operating officer, full authority. If you don't see tangible improvements by then, I'll walk away. Bartholomew looked at his daughter, then back at his son-in-law. Vanessa told me you walked away from a 7-figure salary at Westridge. I did. Why? Adrian met Bartholomew's gaze, his voice steady. Because there are things more important than money. Family is one of them. Later that evening, as they drove through the rain-drenched streets, Vanessa reached across the center console, squeezing his hand. Thank you, she murmured softly. He won't admit it, but Dad knows the company is sinking. I know, Adrian replied, eyes fixed on the wet road ahead. But there's more going on here. This isn't just bad luck. There's a pattern, leaked bids, faulty equipment, key resignations. It feels like someone is orchestrating it. You think it's sabotage from inside the company? Vanessa asked, her grip tightening. I do. I just don't know who yet, but I will find out. What Adrian didn't notice was the brief flicker that passed across Vanessa's face, a fleeting expression of guilt, or perhaps calculation. It was gone before he could register it. You've got guts, Bellamy, Caleb Redding grunted, throwing a stack of revised contracts onto Adrian's makeshift desk. Caleb had served as Mason's head of operations for 15 years and had initially been one of Adrian's strongest opponents. But after 6 weeks of witnessing Adrian's tireless work ethic and his introduction of game-changing processes, Caleb had transitioned from skeptic to loyal supporter. These subcontractor terms slash costs by 17% without sacrificing quality, Adrian said, still focused on the spreadsheet before him. If that's considered gutsy, then I'm fully stocked. Caleb chuckled, shaking his head. Bartholomew's still fuming over the new project management system. Let him grind his teeth, Adrian responded nonchalantly. The system flagged 3 major scheduling issues in its first week. That's 3 potential disasters we avoided before they even began. Adrian slowly lifted his eyes from the screen. How's the Westlake team faring? They're improving, Caleb answered. Your regular presence on site is making a significant impact. The crews are unaccustomed to seeing management actually show up in steel-toed boots. A faint grin touched Adrian's face. I stopped being management the moment I swapped spreadsheets for construction dust. Speaking of, any word from Damon Walsh? Caleb's face stiffened. Nothing. He's been completely silent. He spends 3 years as our lead architect and vanishes right before the Cascade Point rebid? Something doesn't add up. No, it doesn't, Caleb muttered darkly. Adrian pulled a document up on his monitor. Take a look at this. Email chains between Walsh and someone using a secure anonymous service. They started 3 days before his departure. Caleb leaned in, peering over his shoulder. How did you get this? Our internal servers, Adrian replied tersely. Anything sent on a Mason device belongs to the company. If Walsh wanted to leak information, he should have used a burner phone. That's a serious accusation. Corporate espionage. And I've got the proof to back it up. Adrian handed over a file. He's now working with Bishop developers, hiding behind a shell company. And he's not alone. 3 other former Mason employees made the same jump. Caleb muttered a curse under his breath. Bartholomew needs to see this. Not yet, Adrian interjected, raising a hand. We need to figure out who's orchestrating this and why. This wasn't a random move. Someone inside understands our systems far too well. Later that evening, the office was eerily quiet. Adrian sat alone, bathed in the soft blue glow of his computer screen, shadows stretching across the empty room. The door clicked open, and Vanessa entered with a takeout bag in hand. "You skipped dinner again?" she said softly, though her tone carried a hint of concern. "Sorry. I've been working through the Cascade Point proposal," he said, taking the bag from her with a grateful smile. "You're a lifesaver." "Am I?" she teased, sitting on the edge of his desk. In the dim light, her features were striking. Her sleek ponytail framed a face that blended her mother's grace and her father's determination. "Dad mentioned you've been looking through our client files. I just want to get a better understanding of the entire business," Adrian responded, his tone growing cautious. "Even our dealings with Triad Holdings?" Her voice was casual, but Adrian could sense the tension beneath it. He set the sandwich aside. "Triad is the major backer behind Bishop. They've funded 3 of their recent projects, all of which directly competed with ours, and all 3 went to them, right after our bids were altered at the last minute in suspicious ways. Maybe Bishop just outperformed us," she suggested, almost too smoothly. "Maybe. Or maybe they had an unfair advantage. Insider information we never intended to share." Adrian looked at her intently. "Do you know Cameron Bishop personally?" She hesitated, just for a moment. "We've met at industry events. He's well regarded." "He's a predator," Adrian countered, "and he's targeting Mason." Vanessa stood, adjusting her skirt. "You're sounding paranoid. This isn't some cutthroat stock market. Construction is straightforward." "Business is never straightforward," he replied firmly. She leaned in, brushing a kiss against his cheek. "Don't burn yourself out, Adrian. You're taking on too much." Once she was gone, Adrian reopened his laptop and accessed the building's garage surveillance footage. In the grainy video, he saw Vanessa's car leaving the garage, only to pause. A black Mercedes with tinted windows pulled up next to her. The window rolled down, revealing a man whose face was hard to make out. They exchanged a few words, no more than a minute, before both cars drove off. Adrian leaned back, unease growing within him. The theory forming in his mind was no longer distant, it was disturbingly possible. The next morning, Adrian was called into Bartholomew's office. When he arrived, the entire executive team was already seated, with his father-in-law at the head of the table. "Care to explain this?" Bartholomew slid a folder toward him. Inside was a detailed report. Mason's operational performance over the past 2 months. A 62% increase in project completion efficiency. Material waste reduced by almost half. Most notably, an 86% improvement in bid success rates. "These are the improvements you requested," Adrian explained. "We streamlined project oversight, renegotiated with vendors, and implemented new tracking tools. The numbers speak for themselves." "These results are outstanding," said Valerie Prasad, the board's most experienced member. "Our profit projections have tripled compared to this time last year." Bartholomew cleared his throat. "The board has made a unanimous decision. We'd like to offer you the position of Executive Vice President of Operations permanently." A sense of pride flickered in Adrian, but he kept his expression neutral. "I appreciate the offer. I'll need to review everything before I make a final decision." Without hesitation, Bartholomew had agreed to the proposal. "We'll go over the finer points later today," he stated. "For now, I'd like you to sit in on the Cascade Point meeting with me." As they drove, Bartholomew, typically reserved, seemed unusually chatty. "Vanessa mentioned you've been uncovering some discrepancies." "I have," Adrian responded, keeping his eyes on the road. "Someone's been leaking sensitive information to the Bishop Group." Bartholomew raised an eyebrow. "Do you have any proof?" "Enough to indicate a pattern." Adrian said calmly. Bartholomew nodded thoughtfully. Come by my place tonight. Bring everything you've found. Perhaps it's time we confront this directly. That evening, Adrian arrived at the Mason estate, carrying a secure laptop loaded with evidence. He found Bartholomew in his study, but there was an unexpected guest with him, Damon Walsh, the architect who had mysteriously disappeared from Mason weeks ago. Adrian, Walsh greeted stiffly, offering a brief nod. Before Adrian could reply, Bartholomew spoke. We thought it best to clear the air. At that moment, Vanessa entered with a tray of drinks. She was accompanied by a tall man with striking silver hair and an aristocratic bearing. Adrian recognized him immediately from business publications and online articles. Cameron Bishop, founder and CEO of Bishop Developers. Mr. Bellamy, Bishop greeted smoothly, extending his hand. I've heard a great deal about your contributions to Mason construction. Adrian didn't take his hand. Funny, I've heard plenty about your interest in Mason's confidential files. The room chilled instantly. Bartholomew intervened quickly. Cameron is here as my guest and as a potential business partner. A partner? Adrian repeated incredulous. He's been trying to take over your company for months. Bishop corrected him smoothly. Not take over, acquire. There's an important difference. Vanessa spoke up next, deliberately avoiding Adrian's gaze. My father has agreed to sell a majority stake to Bishop Developers. It's a very generous offer, with leadership positions for key Mason executives. Bishop nodded in agreement. Including you, Mr. Bellamy. Your performance has been outstanding. We'd love to have you on board. Adrian's gaze turned sharply to Vanessa, the realization dawning on him. How long? She didn't react. How long what? How long have you been working with him? A fleeting look, guilt perhaps, crossed her face before it vanished. It's just business, Adrian. You taught me that. And what about us? Was that just business too? Before she could respond, Bartholomew stepped in. This merger has been in the works for over a year. Vanessa played a pivotal role in making it happen. A year? Adrian repeated, stunned. That was before I even left Westridge. Before you asked me to come help save this company. You did exactly that, Bishop said matter-of-factly. Mason's valuation skyrocketed because of your efforts. Nothing was wasted. Adrian turned his focus back to Vanessa. You married me because I'm known for turning companies around. You knew your father would listen to your husband. I married you because I saw an opportunity, she replied coolly. An opportunity that could benefit both of us. This merger will make us incredibly wealthy. Us, Adrian muttered bitterly. There's someone else, isn't there? The late nights, the sudden disappearances, the lies. As if on cue, the study door opened and another man entered, a tall, striking figure with the effortless confidence that came with inherited wealth. Sorry I'm late, he said casually. Traffic was a nightmare. Adrian, Vanessa said flatly, meet Hudson Rourke. Hudson stepped forward with a self-assured smirk. I'm Cameron's VP of Business Development and Vanessa's fiancé. Fiancé? Adrian felt as though the floor had dropped away beneath him. It was never personal, Vanessa said, though her eyes suggested otherwise. Hudson and I have known each other a long time. We were together before you and I met. Before you targeted me, Adrian said, his voice dangerously steady. Before I realized your value, she replied. This deal benefits everyone. You've increased Mason's valuation tenfold. Your stock options alone will secure your future. Adrian scanned the room. Bartholomew's calculating gaze, Hudson's smug grin, Bishop's predatory composure, and finally, Vanessa. Beautiful, brilliant, and utterly disloyal. Keep the options, Adrian said, his voice low. Consider them my wedding gift. Without another word, he turned and left, ignoring Vanessa's calls. Once inside his car, he sat in silence, the weight of the betrayal settling over him. After several minutes, he started the engine and drove away, away from the Mason estate, away from everything. He didn't look back. 3 days later, Adrian Bellamy officially resigned from Mason Construction. The press release cited personal reasons. The following week, Mason announced its merger with Bishop Developers, drawing praise across the industry. Bartholomew Mason was quoted celebrating a bold new chapter for the company his grandfather had founded. What the public didn't hear about were the quiet resignations that followed shortly after Adrian's departure, an exodus of loyal employees who chose to follow the man who had once saved Mason rather than stay with those who had sold it. Caleb Redding was the first to step away, followed by 17 other key individuals from top management, engineering, project oversight, estimating, and site leadership, each of whom had witnessed Adrian's leadership firsthand and chose loyalty to him over the assurances offered by the new administration. In a modest high-rise apartment temporarily converted into their operations base, Adrian stood surrounded by the team who had now rallied to his side. "I'm not going to pretend this isn't personal," he stated, his tone steady. "But make no mistake, this is about business. What we're about to build will outshine everything we left behind." Caleb shot him a doubtful glance. "How are we supposed to go up against the combined Bishop Mason force without capital, contracts, or even a brand?" A faint, knowing smile curled at the corners of Adrian's mouth. "We have something far more powerful than any financial statement: expertise. And I've just secured a meeting with someone who can provide the rest." "Who are they?" asked Valerie Prasad, who had recently resigned from Mason's board to join their cause. "Raymond Sinclair," Adrian replied. The room fell silent. Sinclair was more legend than reality in Seattle's business world. A billionaire who had transformed Sinclair Enterprises into a construction powerhouse before a bitter dispute with Cameron Bishop had pushed him into semi-retirement a decade ago. "Sinclair despises Bishop," Caleb said, speaking slowly, "but he hasn't touched construction in years." "That's about to change," Adrian responded, "especially when he hears how we plan to dismantle both Bishop and Mason in one smooth strike." Sinclair's mansion on the waterfront made as much of a statement as it did a home, grand yet refined, offering a commanding view of Puget Sound, designed with an architect's meticulous eye. At 73, Raymond Sinclair still carried the air of a man in control, his piercing blue eyes sizing up Adrian with a blend of curiosity and evaluation as they shook hands. "So you're the Wall Street prodigy who married into the Mason Empire," Sinclair began, leading Adrian into his study. "Only to be cast aside once they had wrung all they could from you?" "That's one way of looking at it," Adrian replied evenly. "Is there another version?" "Yes," Adrian said with a calm certainty. "I'm the man who will help you bring down Cameron Bishop." Sinclair's sharp, genuine laugh broke the tension. "Now that's what I like, straight to the point." He gestured to a leather chair. "Convince me why I should care about your failed marriage." For the next hour, Adrian laid out his vision. A new construction company built on Sinclair's financial resources and connections, powered by the elite team Adrian had assembled from Mason. But this was more than just a business venture. "Bishop Mason controls 6 major development deals right now," Adrian explained. "The crown jewel among them is Cascade Point. The first phase alone is valued at $120 million. They won those contracts based on Mason's reputation for reliability and excellence." Sinclair nodded. "And that reputation walked out the door with you." "Exactly. We'll launch Sinclair Construction as the polished alternative. While they struggle with the fallout from their merger, we'll go directly to their clients, with better terms and the teams those clients already trust." Sinclair's eyes narrowed, his mind clearly at work. "Client poaching is standard strategy. Not exactly the revenge I was expecting from you." "That's just the opening move," Adrian said, leaning forward. "I don't want to compete. I want to eliminate them." A slow smile spread across Sinclair's face. Now we're talking. 6 months flew by in a whirlwind of grueling 18-hour workdays. Sinclair Construction made a quiet debut, but operated with ruthless efficiency. Thanks to Raymond's investment, they were equipped with state-of-the-art tools and top-notch infrastructure. Caleb brought together elite teams, hand-picked from the most reliable independent contractors in the region. Valerie leveraged her extensive industry connections to set up private conversations with developers unsettled by the Bishop-Mason merger. Adrian remained behind the scenes, officially listed as a strategic advisor in company documents. His divorce from Vanessa moved forward smoothly. He asked for nothing, neither from her nor from the Mason estate. The business press barely noticed their separation, too absorbed in the monumental coverage of the Bishop-Mason merger. One overcast Tuesday morning, Adrian sat across from Raymond in the older man's study, reviewing their progress. "Westlake Tower, Brighton Commons," Raymond said with a satisfied smile. "Both were former Mason sites. Now they're under our banner. Cameron must be furious." Bishop's arrogance insulates him from concern. "For now," Adrian replied. "He still believes these are isolated incidents." "But Cascade Point," Raymond began. "That's a different matter," Adrian interjected. "That project is personal for both Cameron and Bartholomew." Raymond allowed a thin smile to play on his lips. "Which is why I've set up a meeting with Triad Holdings next week. They're anxious about all the delays." "And what about Hudson Rourke?" Adrian asked. "My team has confirmed your suspicions," Raymond replied. "Rourke and Vanessa have been involved for over 2 years, long before your marriage ended. They were careful, but not perfect. We've got hotel records, dinner receipts, and even texts pulled from a cloud backup." Adrian nodded, his expression unreadable. "And the missing funds?" "Rourke's been quietly diverting money from Bishop's development pool for years. Small amounts buried deep, but together it's a fortune. Cameron doesn't know yet." "Not for long," Adrian said with certainty. "He'll find out soon enough." The following week, Adrian joined Raymond for the crucial meeting with Triad Holdings. As they waited in the boardroom, Adrian went over the presentation one last time. The door swung open, and Alexander Chen, Triad's managing director, entered with his executive team. "Raymond?" Chen greeted, offering a firm handshake. Then his gaze shifted to Adrian, filled with curiosity. "And you must be Mr. Bellamy." "I've heard quite a few fascinating things about you," Chen remarked, a sly grin creeping across his face. "Must all be true, I'm sure," Adrian responded, his smile polite yet devoid of any real warmth. Chen chuckled softly. "Let's see if you can live up to your reputation." Cascade Point was beginning to raise concerns among the investors. The operational efficiencies Bishop-Mason had promised had yet to materialize. "Mergers often come with their fair share of integration problems," Raymond suggested. "True," Adrian acknowledged, smoothly steering the conversation in a new direction. "But Sinclair Construction offers a fresh viewpoint." He presented their counterproposal, a bold reinvention of the project that leveraged cutting-edge materials, shortened the construction timeline, and promised significant cost savings. The real asset, however, was the team. Caleb Redding at the helm, joined by the original designers and engineers who had initially brought Cascade Point to life. "The same team that earned your trust from the very beginning," Adrian said. "Now bolstered by state-of-the-art infrastructure and free from the chaos of internal corporate conflicts." Chen regarded him thoughtfully, then gave a small nod. "That's convincing. Replacing a lead contractor midway through a project is almost unheard of," he remarked. "Much like working with Sinclair," Raymond countered. "But let's be frank, Alexander. Cameron Bishop has a reputation. He acquires companies, strips them down, and exits. Is that really the kind of leadership you want for your flagship development?" The meeting continued for another hour, ending with polite farewells but no final resolution. As they stepped out of Triad's offices, Raymond looked pensive. Chen's interested, but cautious. He'll need assurances. He'll get them, Adrian replied. But first, we have to deal with Hudson Rourke. He glanced at Raymond. Phase 2 begins now. 2 days later, Hudson Rourke opened an anonymous email. Attached were incriminating bank statements detailing his embezzlement of funds from Bishop developers. The message was brief. Midnight, Westlake Park. Come alone, or Cameron gets the files. Rourke arrived 20 minutes early, pacing nervously and scanning the desolate park. Adrian, hidden in the shadows of his car, waited until Rourke's anxiety reached its peak. Then he emerged and approached, his steps slow and deliberate. Evening, Hudson. Rourke spun around, his hand instinctively reaching for his jacket. You're the one who sent that message. I am, Adrian confirmed, stopping at a safe distance. Think of it as a professional courtesy. Rourke let out a hollow laugh. You're calling this blackmail? No, Adrian replied coolly. That was when you and Vanessa used my work to artificially inflate Mason's value. This is a negotiation. Rourke's eyes sharpened. What do you want? Information, Adrian said, his tone measured. In exchange for my silence. What kind of information? Everything, Adrian answered. The true financial health of Bishop Mason, the actual status of Cascade Point, and most importantly, the full details of your arrangement with Vanessa. Rourke's mind raced behind his narrowed gaze. After a brief pause, he nodded. Not here. My car. Adrian shook his head. We're doing this my way. He pointed across the street to a coffee shop, still open, well lit, with a few patrons scattered at tables. Public, safe, neutral ground. 3 hours later, Adrian had everything he needed. A comprehensive report on Bishop Mason's shaky finances, proof of drastic cost-cutting measures on the development, and confirmation that Vanessa had orchestrated the entire scheme as a way to make Mason more appealing for acquisition. She came to me, Rourke confessed, the words spilling out now that he had started. Said she needed someone inside Bishop. We went to college together. She knew I had flexibility. And bringing me into the fold? Adrian asked. Rourke grimaced. That was her idea. She knew your work, thought you were the perfect fit. He averted his gaze. She said you'd modernize things without stepping on her father's pride, that you'd work yourself to the bone to prove yourself. And all the while, you passed her information? Adrian interrupted. Rourke shook his head. No, she gave it to me. I was just the messenger. This was always her plan, Adrian said, his voice low. She wanted out from under Sinclair's shadow, and this was her way of doing it. Adrian fell silent for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, quietly, he asked, What did she say about me? About our marriage? Rourke hesitated before shrugging slightly. That you were useful, smart, driven, but ultimately disposable. Adrian nodded once, as if something he had suspected had now been confirmed. Thank you for your honesty, Hudson. He stood up to leave. Here's mine. By tomorrow, Cameron Bishop will have those files, unless you follow my instructions to the letter. Rourke's complexion drained of color. I said I'd trade silence for information, and now I have what I need. Here's how the events unfolded. The corporate retreat at Snoqualmie Lodge, arranged by Cameron Bishop, was intended to foster team cohesion following the merger. More than 200 employees gathered for a 3-day program packed with team-building activities, strategic talks, and some awkward, forced mingling at the scenic mountain resort. On the second evening, Bartholomew Mason stood at the bar, nursing his drink as he observed his team's somewhat uneasy interactions with Bishop's staff. The merger's progress was slower than expected. Cultural conflicts, differing working styles, and stubborn resistance from some individuals were hindering the integration, despite Bishop's relentless push for a streamlined approach. As he observed the scene, Vanessa appeared beside him, elegant in a sleek black cocktail dress. "Taking pride in your creation?" she asked with a light tone. "Hardly," Bartholomew grumbled. "Half my people have jumped ship to Sinclair, and the rest are already planning their exit." "This wasn't the partnership we had in mind," he added. "It's just a phase," Vanessa responded with calm assurance. "Once Cascade Point is finalized, things will smooth over." "If it's finalized," Bartholomew countered flatly. "Triad Holdings has been all over us for progress updates." Before Vanessa could respond, Hudson Rourke approached them, visibly agitated. "We need to talk, privately." A few moments later, the three of them were behind closed doors in Bishop's suite. Rourke paced back and forth while Bartholomew and Vanessa exchanged tense glances. "What's happening?" Vanessa asked, her voice sharp. "Adrian Bellamy," Rourke said darkly. "He's back, and he knows everything, Viv. About us." "That's impossible," Bartholomew said, his voice filled with surprise. "He disappeared after the divorce, didn't contest anything, didn't touch Mason's assets." "He doesn't want money," Rourke replied grimly. "He wants to tear everything apart, and he's teamed up with Raymond Sinclair." The mention of Sinclair hit the group like a thunderclap. Bartholomew sank into a chair, his face tightening with realization. "Sinclair," he muttered. "That vulture never misses a chance to undermine Cameron." "It's more than just sabotage," Rourke continued. "Adrian has learned about my financial dealings." He paused, then added, "He's blackmailing me, threatening to expose everything unless I provide him with intel on our operations." Vanessa's voice dropped to a hiss. "You've been embezzling from Cameron?" Rourke's expression grew hard. "Don't act surprised. You both knew exactly what kind of man you were working with, both personally and professionally." "Enough," Bartholomew interrupted. "What exactly does Bellamy want?" "Access to Cascade Point data, our client conversations, details on cash flow problems," Rourke answered. "And what did you give him?" Vanessa demanded, her eyes narrowing. Rourke turned away, ashamed. "Everything he asked for. I didn't see any other choice." "There's always another choice," Bartholomew said coldly. "And you chose the worst one." "What would you have done in my position?" Rourke retorted. "If Bishop found out about the embezzlement, I'd be done for." "We'll deal with Bishop," Vanessa said, her voice steady. "But first, we need to control Adrian. What does he know?" Rourke detailed his conversation with Adrian, and none of them noticed the sleek recording device concealed beneath the coffee table, a high-tech transmitter secretly planted hours earlier by a resort maintenance worker who had been generously paid for the task. Hundreds of miles away in the command center of Sinclair Construction, Adrian sat with Raymond, Caleb, and Valerie, listening intently to the live feed. "They're cracking," Caleb noted with evident satisfaction. "Just as planned," Adrian replied, his tone composed. Hudson was always the weak link. "Now it's time to apply pressure on the others," Raymond said with a thin smile. "Triad Holdings has requested a joint meeting with Bishop Mason and us, Sinclair Construction," he added. "They want to compare proposals for Cascade Point." "Alexander Chung is more strategic than I gave him credit for," Adrian mused. "He's engineered a bidding war." "A war we're positioned to win," Valerie said with a knowing look, "especially now that we understand how vulnerable Bishop Mason really is." "And that means it's time for Phase 3, Adrian declared, gesturing to several monitors displaying financial projections. "We accelerate the timeline." By the following morning, as the leadership of Bishop Mason prepared to leave the retreat, a shocking headline hit the financial newswire. Sinclair Enterprises had quietly acquired a substantial minority stake in Triad Holdings. The market's reaction was swift and severe. Bishop Mason's stock plummeted by 8%, rattled by the potential threat to its prized Cascade Point project. Cameron Bishop was furious during an emergency board meeting. "Sinclair blindsided us," he seethed. This changes everything with Triad. It was a bold move, Bartholomew conceded, but not a fatal one. We still have the permits, contracts, and established relationships. Triad can't back out, unless they have a reason, Hudson Rourke remarked quietly. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to him. The quality control failures on the North Foundation, Rourke said. If those come to light? They won't, Bishop snapped. That information is strictly internal. Vanessa fixed Rourke with a sharp gaze. Hudson, exactly how much did you tell Adrian Bellamy? Her question lingered in the air, heavy with the tension of what was about to unfold. Before Rourke could respond, Bishop's assistant abruptly interrupted with an urgent update. Alexander Chen had demanded an immediate meeting with both Bishop and Bartholomew. 2 hours later, the three men sat across from each other in the stark, tense environment of Triad's boardroom, the silence oppressive. Gentlemen, Chen said bluntly, not wasting any time, I've uncovered troubling information concerning Cascade Point. He paused, letting the gravity of his words sink in. Specifically, he continued, there were significant concerns about the North Foundation's structural integrity. Bishop's expression remained unreadable. All our work adheres strictly to the required standards, Alexander. You know that, he replied firmly. Do I? Chen responded, his tone ice-cold. With that, he slid a folder across the polished table and met their gazes. These are excerpts from your internal reports. They tell a different story. Bartholomew skimmed through the documents, his face darkening as he read. These are confidential files. Where did you obtain them? That's not important, Chen said dismissively. What matters is whether the findings are accurate. They're preliminary evaluations, Bishop countered, attempting to downplay the situation. They can easily be misinterpreted when taken out of context. Then you won't have an issue with an independent structural audit, Chen replied coolly, at your company's expense. Bartholomew leaned forward, his expression tense. Such a review would put our schedule at serious risk. Chen remained unshaken. Delays due to caution are far better than those caused by a collapse. Triad has already invested $58 million in Cascade Point. We will not proceed without confirmation of its safety. What exactly are you suggesting? Bishop asked, his voice low but sharp. You have two choices, Chen stated. Either authorize a complete independent evaluation or release us from the exclusivity agreement so we can explore other options. Sinclair Construction, Bartholomew muttered bitterly under his breath. Chen's lips twisted into a thin smile. Their proposal is certainly intriguing. Once Chen had departed, Bishop slammed his fist onto the table, the sound echoing in the silent room. This is sabotage. Sinclair and Chen are clearly in league. They've leaked our internal data to him. The real question is how that data got out, Bartholomew said, his brow furrowing. Those documents were never meant to leave our secure systems. They both turned to Hudson Rourke, who shifted uneasily under their gaze. I didn't give him those files, Rourke said quickly, defensively. Adrian only asked for financials, not technical reports. Then someone else is leaking information, Vanessa said as she entered the room, having just arrived. Maybe more than one someone. Bishop's expression hardened. I want everyone responsible found and dealt with. This must be stopped before the Triad board meets next week. That evening, Rourke was driving home when his phone rang, the caller ID hidden. He answered the call on speaker, his voice tense. You set me up. Triad knows about the North Foundation. Yes, Adrian's voice came calmly through the speaker. Think of it as a demonstration of what I'm capable of. They're on to me, Rourke said, his voice sharp. If they find the proof, they won't, Adrian interrupted smoothly, because you're going to help me with the next step. Rourke let out a bitter laugh. Help you? I'm already in too deep. Why would I dig myself in further? Because I'm offering you protection, Adrian replied, his voice persuasive. I'll erase the financial trail, give you a fresh start, and a position at Sinclair once everything settles down. There was a long pause. You're bluffing, Rourke said finally. Maybe, Adrian answered. But Cameron Bishop won't be as kind when he finds out about your creative accounting. $8 million, Hudson. Another pause. That kind of money buys a lot of revenge, Adrian added, his tone ominous. Rourke sighed, knowing there was no turning back now. What do you need from me? Something simple, Adrian replied. Keep doing what you've been doing, and this time, he added, do it with purpose. Betray them, with intent. Cascade Point's situation deteriorated rapidly. Triad Holdings commissioned an independent evaluation, which confirmed the structural issues with the foundation. Construction was halted while a full-scale engineering solution was developed. The delay would cost millions and threatened to breach contractual agreements. In response, Bishop called an emergency executive meeting. Bartholomew, Vanessa, and the company's legal counsel sat at the table, the atmosphere heavy with tension. Triad is using this to renegotiate, the lawyer explained. They're asking for a 20% price reduction and performance guarantees we may struggle to meet. Failure is not an option, Bishop said firmly, his tone resolute. We need a solution. There may be one, Vanessa suggested carefully. Sinclair's proposal for Triad included a new method of reinforcing foundations. If we could adapt their design, out of the question, Bishop snapped. We will not copy Sinclair. Pride won't save this project, Cameron, Bartholomew countered. If their solution works, we should use it. This isn't about pride, Bishop replied sharply. It's about positioning. The moment we copy them, we elevate them. That shifts the balance in their favor. The debate circled aimlessly with no resolution, until Hudson Rourke finally spoke up. There may be another way, he said, his voice soft but steady. What if we took control of the technology ourselves? Bishop asked sharply, his voice cutting through the silence. Go on, he pressed, sensing the hesitation around the room. Rourke spoke up. It's Derek Zimmer, he said. He's the lead engineer at Sinclair, the one who designed the reinforcement framework. No one knows the system like he does. And what about him? Vanessa interjected, urging Rourke to elaborate. Rourke nodded slightly. He's receptive to offers. I have a source who claims Zimmer isn't happy with his compensation at Sinclair. With the right incentive, we could convince him to leave. Bishop leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing as he considered the implications. Taking this kind of step is risky, he stated with calm precision. Not as risky as losing Cascade Point, Rourke shot back quickly. Not as risky as letting Sinclair overtake us as the leading firm in the region. The following day, Derek Zimmer received a carefully worded message asking for a private meeting to discuss a mutually advantageous opportunity. What Bishop Mason failed to realize was that Zimmer didn't exist until Adrian had fabricated his identity just a few months earlier. The so-called groundbreaking foundation system was little more than a standard engineering concept disguised with superficial tweaks and clever marketing, and Bishop had fallen for it. They've bought into it, Adrian said with a hint of satisfaction, as he and Raymond watched the data flowing in from their operations hub. Rourke's meeting with Zimmer is scheduled for tonight, Adrian added. Is our operative ready? Raymond asked. Completely prepared and fully in character, Adrian confirmed. By this time tomorrow, Bishop will believe they've gained a huge advantage, when, in reality, they're walking right into a trap, Raymond finished, a sly grin creeping across his face. You're a master of the long game, Raymond said, glancing at Adrian. I've had great teachers, Adrian replied modestly. Vanessa and Bartholomew taught me everything I know. I'm just putting those lessons to work. 2 days later, Bishop Mason made a bold announcement. They claimed to have solved the foundational issues at Cascade Point with a revolutionary reinforcement system designed to ensure both safety and project timelines. Triad Holdings responded cautiously, expressing a willingness to resume construction pending a final review. Meanwhile, Sinclair Construction remained silent, keeping a low profile in the media. Instead, Adrian arranged a quiet dinner with Alexander Chen. "It seems your competitors have cracked the code," Chen observed as they settled into a private dining room with a view of Elliott Bay. "It appears so," Adrian replied, his tone nonchalant. "Congratulations on your project moving forward," Chen offered politely. Adrian nodded slightly, acknowledging the words. "Thank you." Chen studied him for a moment. "You seem awfully calm for someone who just lost a $120 million deal." "Mr. Chen," Adrian said smoothly, "I've come to realize that most business victories are fleeting. What truly endures are the relationships we build." "Quite the philosopher," Chen said with a touch of amusement. "I expected more frustration." "Expectations can often mislead us," Adrian said, signaling for the waiter to bring the wine. "Something Bishop Mason may soon discover." His words lingered in the air like a quiet warning, but the conversation soon shifted to other matters: project updates, industry developments, and Sinclair's growth plans. It wasn't until dessert was served that Chen circled back to the earlier topic. "Bartholomew Mason reached out to me this morning," he said. "Oh?" Adrian replied, taking a sip of water. "He implied that Sinclair's foundation system might be infringing on some of their proprietary work," Chen said, his voice lowering slightly. Adrian remained composed. "Did he elaborate?" "He suggested that your system bears a striking resemblance to their new solution," Chen said, looking at Adrian closely. "Interesting claim," Adrian said evenly, especially considering how recently their breakthrough occurred. Chen set his fork down, his brow furrowing. "You saw this coming." "I anticipated it," Adrian corrected. "There's a distinction." "And what's the difference?" "Proof," Adrian said, sliding a slim folder across the table. "This contains every documented interaction between Hudson Rourke and the man he believed to be Derek Zimmer. Every conversation, every meeting, every promise of confidential data." Chen opened the folder and began flipping through the pages, his expression growing more serious with each page. "This is quite thorough." "I believe in being meticulous," Adrian said coolly. "Mr. Chen, Triad now has a choice. You can continue with a partner who attempted to steal technology, or you can align with the one who exposed them." "You set this whole thing up," Chen said slowly. "Created a fake identity, lured them into misconduct, tracked everything, all to bring down Bishop Mason." "I created an opportunity," Adrian said simply. "They took it on their own." Chen closed the folder and looked up at Adrian. "So what are you asking from Triad?" "Only what you were already considering," Adrian said. "An honest assessment of who truly deserves your business." The next morning, Triad Holdings issued a public statement. All work at Cascade Point would be halted indefinitely, pending a comprehensive review of their strategic partners. Bishop Mason's stock plummeted by 22% in a single trading session. Analysts began speculating about looming lawsuits and potential contract violations. Amid the chaos, few noticed that 3 of Bishop's other major clients had quietly initiated talks with Sinclair Construction. By the end of the week, Bishop Mason had lost more than 40% of its market value. Behind closed doors, rumors of cash flow problems and the potential for insolvency began to spread. Cameron Bishop called for an emergency board meeting as the company entered full crisis mode. The atmosphere in the boardroom was charged with tension, as the long-standing rift between the leadership of Bishop and Mason finally became impossible to ignore beneath the veneer of corporate diplomacy. "This is a deliberate attack," Bishop asserted with unwavering certainty. "Adrian Bellamy and Raymond Sinclair are executing a meticulous strategy to dismantle us." Bartholomew responded calmly, his voice devoid of emotion. "Perhaps. But their success is the result of weaknesses we've allowed to surface. The fractures within the company were undeniable. The failed acquisition, the technology leak, these were not rumors. They had been handed ammunition, no fabrication needed. "This all stems from your son-in-law," Bishop accused sharply. "My daughter's ex-husband," Bartholomew corrected, his eyes locking onto Hudson Rourke, who sat rigidly beside Bishop. "A man linked to every disaster we've faced, all thanks to your protege." Rourke's face reddened. "That's an unfounded accusation," he protested, but was immediately interrupted. "Is it?" Vanessa's voice cut through the tension. "Cascade Point Specs, the Triad Holdings meeting. Every time something fell apart, you were right there." "This is absurd," Rourke quickly retorted. "Cameron, you know me." "We're not doing this right now," Bishop interjected, raising a hand to silence the conversation. "Pointing fingers won't fix our situation." "Our cash reserves are dangerously low," the CFO warned. "Lenders are getting anxious. They want more collateral before they'll extend credit." "I'll personally back the loans," Bishop declared, his voice firm. "And Bartholomew will as well." All eyes turned toward Bartholomew, whose silence filled the room with a growing sense of anticipation. "No," he finally replied, his voice resolute. "I won't risk my personal wealth to salvage a failing merger." The declaration hit the room like an explosion. Bishop stared at him, speechless. "We had an agreement," Bishop said quietly. "An agreement you've consistently undermined," Bartholomew retorted. "This was meant to be a partnership, one based on balance. Instead, you've sidelined Mason leadership, ignored our advice, and allowed your allies," he gave a subtle nod toward Rourke, "to tarnish our reputation." "Dad," Vanessa started to speak. "No," Bartholomew interrupted her sharply. "It's time. I'm activating the dissolution clause. Mason Construction is ending all ties with Bishop Developers, effective immediately." The boardroom descended into chaos. Lawyers scrambled to find documents, executives clashed over control and territory, and amid the chaos, Cameron Bishop sat in stunned silence, watching as the empire he had built began to crumble. Outside the office tower, Adrian Bellamy read a message from an inside source. "Dissolution invoked. Bartholomew pulling away. Phase 3 complete." A small smile tugged at Adrian's lips. "Right on schedule," he murmured. In the weeks that followed, the disintegration of Bishop Mason became headline news. What started as a simple restructuring turned into an all-out corporate battle. Bartholomew Mason, armed with strategic clauses hidden within the merger contracts, moved swiftly to reclaim his company's assets and its name. Bishop retaliated with lawsuits, accusing Bartholomew of breaching the merger agreement. As both sides drained their resources in courtrooms and boardrooms, Sinclair Construction quietly surged ahead, capitalizing on the opportunity. With Raymond's financial backing, Adrian's strategic brilliance, and a seasoned team, Sinclair quickly secured former Bishop Mason clients desperate for stability. Their stock skyrocketed, tripling in just 6 months, transforming Adrian's investment into an immense fortune. One rainy Friday evening, Adrian sat alone in his office, meticulously reviewing plans for their latest project, a waterfront development once under Bishop's control. A soft knock broke his concentration. "Still working at 8 on a Friday?" Caleb Redding leaned casually against the doorframe, holding 2 glasses of scotch. "The rest of us are downstairs celebrating." Adrian accepted the drink. "Just finishing up the Harbor Point acquisition." "Another victory," Caleb remarked, settling into a chair. "That's 4 major projects we've taken from them in 4 months." "Business is business," Adrian replied, echoing Vanessa's words from that fateful night. Caleb studied him closely. "Is it? Because this feels personal." Adrian took a slow sip. "Does that concern you?" "Not professionally," Caleb responded. "You've built something extraordinary. Sinclair is now the top firm in the Pacific Northwest." He hesitated before adding, But on a personal level, I just wonder, when does it end? Before Adrian could respond, his encrypted phone buzzed with a new message. The sender's number was unmistakable. His pulse quickened slightly. I need to take this, he said, motioning toward the door. Once Caleb left, Adrian opened the message. We need to talk privately. It's urgent. V. He stared at the screen, carefully weighing the implications. Then, with deliberate precision, he typed a response. Tomorrow, noon. Here's the address. On the following day, Adrian sat at a secluded table in a quiet cafe, tucked away from the bustling parts of Bellevue. The cafe was unassuming, chosen specifically to avoid being recognized. He waited patiently, and precisely at noon, Vanessa arrived. Her composed appearance remained, but there were visible hints of strain around her eyes as she approached. Thanks for meeting me, she said, as she gracefully took a seat across from him. My curiosity got the better of me, Adrian replied, his voice measured and cautious. So, what's this about? He asked, his eyes narrowing slightly. Vanessa glanced quickly around the room, then leaned in closer, her voice lowering. Hudson Rourke has been embezzling funds from the company. Your old company, Bartholomew's. He's been siphoning millions through fake companies, manipulating project budgets, and tampering with vendor contracts for kickbacks. Adrian remained impassive. And what does that have to do with me? He's using your methods, Vanessa explained. The financial strategies you developed when you were still with us. He's taken what you built and twisted it into a means of stealing. He's bleeding Mason dry, and my father refuses to see it. Adrian's face remained unreadable. And why would I care? Because innocent people will suffer, she said, her voice softening. There are over 3,000 employees who rely on Mason for their livelihoods. They're not involved in the past, Adrian. He studied her intently, trying to detect any hint of dishonesty. So, what exactly do you want from me? Help me expose Rourke's actions before it's too late, she pleaded. You have a finance team. Why don't you use them? He asked, his voice cold. He's already infiltrated them, she said quietly. He's thorough, like someone I used to know. Adrian raised an eyebrow. I'm sure I should be flattered. Vanessa lowered her gaze. I deserve that. But this isn't about me or my father. It's about stopping Rourke before the damage is irreversible. Adrian leaned back in his chair, contemplating her words. After a long silence, he gave a single nod. Send me 6 months of financial records, transaction logs, approval workflows, server access, everything. I'll have it to you tonight, she said, relief washing over her as she stood up. Before she could leave, he reached out and caught her wrist. Vanessa, if this is another scheme... It's not, she interrupted, her voice urgent. For a brief moment, Adrian glimpsed the woman he once thought he knew. No matter what you think of me, I never wanted it to come to this. Without another word, she walked away. Adrian sat motionless, absent-mindedly turning his untouched coffee cup. His phone buzzed, drawing his attention. A message from Raymond flashed on the screen. Meeting confirmed with June. Triad is ready to move forward. He responded with a terse acknowledgement, his mind already working through the implications. The web of vengeance he had been weaving was nearing its peak. Bishop was on the brink of collapse. Mason was struggling to recover. Hudson Rourke was poised to be exposed as the mastermind behind both disasters. Yet Vanessa's unexpected plea complicated matters. If Rourke was indeed embezzling from Mason, exposing him might be the key to Bartholomew regaining control of the company. But was that Adrian's goal? Or would it be more satisfying to let Rourke complete the destruction Adrian had set in motion? 3 days later, Adrian had his answer. The data Vanessa had provided was even more damning than he had expected. The fraud ran deeper than he had thought, a meticulously constructed scheme that had siphoned over $22 million in just 6 months. But the worst revelation came from the server logs. Vanessa knew. She had accessed the system multiple times and seen the discrepancies, yet only now had she reached out to him. He compiled everything, a comprehensive timeline of Rourke's crimes, cross-referenced with Vanessa's silence, into an in-depth report. He then arranged a meeting, not with Vanessa, but with Bartholomew Mason. They met in a private room at the Columbia Tower Club, a neutral space, devoid of any advantage for either party. "So you're the one behind all this," Bartholomew said as soon as they were seated. "Sinclair's rise, Bishop's fall, it's all your doing." "An understandable assumption," Adrian replied, "but not entirely accurate." He placed a flash drive on the table between them. "This contains irrefutable evidence of internal fraud at Mason, orchestrated by Hudson Rourke. There may be others involved, knowingly or unknowingly." Bartholomew eyed the drive warily. "Why bring this to me?" "Despite everything, I still respect what you built," Adrian said. "Mason once stood for something. Rourke is destroying that for his own gain." "And now you care about Mason's legacy?" Bartholomew asked, skepticism in his tone. "I care about justice," Adrian replied flatly. "Rourke needs to answer for what he's done." Bartholomew studied him for a moment. "Does that include what he's done with Vanessa?" "Everything," Adrian said, his voice unwavering. The silence in the room was thick with tension. "Does she know you're here?" Bartholomew finally asked. "No, and I won't be the one to tell her." After a brief pause, Bartholomew reached for the flash drive, his fingers brushing against it as he prepared to examine the evidence. "I never intended to let you go, Adrian. But Cameron made it clear it was non-negotiable for the merger. He saw you as a liability," Bartholomew explained. "He wasn't wrong." Adrian's tone remained steady. He wasn't. Bartholomew slipped the flash drive into his pocket. "So where does that leave Sinclair Construction and what's left of Mason?" "That's for you to decide," Adrian replied, standing up. "But if you're wise, you'll act quickly. Rourke's theft has escalated dramatically in recent weeks. Time is running out." Precisely 1 week later, Hudson Rourke was arrested on several charges: embezzlement, wire fraud, and money laundering. It turned out the FBI had been quietly gathering evidence for months, supported by anonymous financial records. His arrest occurred in the midst of a board meeting at Mason Construction's headquarters, an expertly orchestrated takedown that was both deeply humiliating and highly visible, immediately dominating the news. Cameron Bishop quickly distanced himself from Rourke, denying any knowledge of his former protege's illegal activities. Bartholomew released an official statement pledging full cooperation with investigators and committing to make reparations for affected projects. Vanessa Mason, however, remained conspicuously absent from all public communications. That evening, Adrian found Vanessa waiting by his car in the dimly lit parking garage. Her usual composed demeanor was gone, leaving behind a woman who appeared utterly exhausted. "You went to my father," she said, her voice flat. "I did," Adrian responded, his stance unwavering. "Why?" she asked. "Because you knew what Rourke was doing long before this happened, and you chose to remain silent. The logs are clear, Vanessa. You watched him siphon millions and said nothing." She flinched but didn't deny it. "I thought I could control him, use it against him when the time was right." "You always play the long game," Adrian remarked bluntly. "I've learned from my mistakes," she replied quietly. "Rourke wasn't like you. He lacked your strength. He was easy to manipulate." "I thought that made him less dangerous," she continued. "And now? I've lost everything. My father knows I kept quiet. The FBI suspects my involvement. Rourke's threatening to expose everyone he ever worked with." "It's over," Adrian said flatly. He studied her, the woman who once held his heart. Even in her downfall, she still held a measure of beauty, though her eyes were now calculating. What do you want from me, Vanessa? Nothing, she answered, surprising him. I just wanted you to understand. I know now what it feels like to be betrayed by someone you trusted, to watch your entire world crumble because of someone else's lies. Adrian unlocked the door to his car. Understanding born from experience, a costly teacher. The most painful lessons usually are, she said quietly. As he was about to get in, she added, Was any of it real, Adrian? Between us? He paused, his hand on the car door. Does it matter anymore? It does. To me. After a moment that stretched the silence thin, he answered, Yes, it was real. Every second, every promise, every plan for what we might have had. That's what made the betrayal so final. Without another word, he got in. But in the rearview mirror, he saw her still standing there, unmoving in the fading light, watching him disappear into the darkness. The fall of Bishop Mason created a vacuum in Seattle's construction industry, a gap Sinclair Construction was perfectly positioned to fill. With Adrian officially named CEO, Sinclair quickly locked in major development deals across the Pacific Northwest. Trade publications lauded the rise of what they called a Bellamy Renaissance, praising the surge in innovation, while financial experts heralded the company's rapid ascent. But Cameron Bishop wasn't the type to bow out quietly. Although his firm had taken a significant hit in both reputation and profits, his resources were far from depleted, and his pride remained intact. The rivalry between Bishop and the newly formed Sinclair-Bellamy alliance became legendary. It was a high-stakes game of strategy, with the city's skyline as the battleground. One bright spring morning, Adrian stood at the massive windows of his office, watching construction crews breathe life into Harbor Point, the waterfront project that had once been Bishop's pride and joy. Caleb Redding entered for their routine briefing. The East Towers Foundation is complete. We're ahead of schedule by 2 weeks and under budget by 4%, Caleb reported. Excellent, Adrian responded, turning from the glass. What's the status on the Triad Holdings deal? Final edits are ready for your approval, Caleb replied. Alexander Chen indicated they're ready to greenlight all 3 phases immediately, assuming the terms are agreeable. Adrian's mood brightened. Schedule the presentation for next week. I want Raymond there as well. This could be our biggest deal yet. Caleb hesitated. There's one more thing. Cameron Bishop wants a private meeting. No attorneys, no media. Adrian raised an eyebrow. Did he give a reason? All he said was that it involves matters of mutual interest and the potential for resolution. Adrian nodded slowly. Interesting timing. The Harbor Point unveiling is just weeks away. That was the first major loss he ever took. Do you think he's finally ready to give in? Caleb asked. Adrian didn't respond right away, his gaze drifting back to the rising towers beyond the window. Did Caleb contact you? He did, Adrian replied. Cameron Bishop isn't one to retreat, but he might be open to a conversation. Then set it up, Caleb instructed. Neutral ground, standard security protocols. The meeting was scheduled at Raymond Sinclair's Elite Club, a discreet sanctuary where the city's power brokers could conduct their dealings away from prying eyes. Bishop arrived precisely on time, his presence imposing despite the recent setbacks he'd endured. The 2 men met at a small table in a secluded corner. Thanks for making time to meet, Bishop said, his voice deliberately neutral. Just being polite, Adrian responded, his tone casual. So, what brings you here, Cameron? Bishop let out a slow breath. Let's get to the point. The ongoing tension between our companies is hurting both sides. I suggest we call a ceasefire, end the conflict. A faint, knowing smile curled on Adrian's lips. Interesting choice of words. Mutually damaging implies we're both suffering. From where I stand, Sinclair Construction is thriving, while Bishop Developers is barely holding on. Bishop's face tightened for a moment before he masked his irritation. Hubris always precedes downfall, Adrian, he said. You've had your wins, no doubt. But this war isn't over. Is that a threat? More of an observation, Bishop corrected. He slid a folder across the table. This is the initial proposal. I'm offering to buy Sinclair Construction. Adrian blinked in disbelief before laughing aloud. You've got to be kidding. I'm serious, Bishop replied, his tone unyielding. Set your terms. Whatever valuation you deem fair, Bishop continued, with an additional amount, compensation for the inconvenience. Inconvenience? Adrian repeated, amused. Is that what we're calling it now? You mean your little scheme to get me fired and ruin my reputation? Strictly business, Bishop shrugged. Nothing personal? Everything is personal, Adrian shot back. You backed Hudson Rourke while he was involved with my wife. You plotted to take advantage of my expertise only to discard me afterward. You even threatened to blacklist me if I didn't silently accept the divorce terms. That's ancient history, Bishop waved dismissively. Let's not get sidetracked. We're here to discuss a potential opportunity. Adrian leaned forward, his voice steady. Let me make this clear, Cameron. Sinclair Construction isn't for sale. Not to you, not to anyone. As for a ceasefire, that ship sailed the moment you decided I wasn't worth keeping around. You're making a grave mistake, Bishop said, his voice darkening. I still have power. Connections. You mean the banks? Adrian interrupted coldly. They're losing confidence in you by the day. Since your merger fell apart, your stock has plummeted by 63%. Most of your flagship projects are stalled, and your competitors have seized them. That reputation for ruthless precision? It's gone. Now they see you as floundering. Bishop's composure cracked for a moment. Chasing vengeance won't undo what happened. Vanessa made her choice. This isn't about Vanessa, Adrian said, his tone even. It hasn't been for a long time. This is about facing the consequences. You and Bartholomew treated people like pawns. Now the bills come due. So, that's it? Bishop asked. No deal, no truce. Just all-out war until one of us is destroyed? Adrian stood. Not one of us, Cameron, just you. As he turned to leave, Bishop's voice followed him. You've made a lifelong enemy today, Bellamy. Adrian paused for a moment and glanced back. No, Cameron. I've made you irrelevant. That's even worse. A week later, an unexpected request arrived. Vanessa Mason wanted to meet. Despite Raymond's caution, Adrian agreed. He chose a public venue for their discussion, a quiet, neutral restaurant. Vanessa arrived looking composed, yet somehow diminished, her usual confidence replaced with an uncertainty that seemed out of place. Once they ordered, she wasted no time getting to the point. I'm leaving Seattle, she said. I'm starting fresh somewhere else. Smart move, Adrian replied. Given everything, staying would have been complicated. To put it mildly, she responded, a trace of her old biting wit returning. Federal investigations, frozen assets, complete social isolation, it's been one hell of a crash course. I can imagine, Adrian said. Vanessa studied him closely. You don't seem particularly victorious considering everything. Should I be? Most would be, she said. You methodically dismantled everything I cared about. My company, my social life, whatever financial stability I had left. Isn't that what you wanted? Adrian paused before answering. What I wanted was fairness, consequences that matched the damage done. You, your father, Bishop, Rourke, you all made choices that hurt people. Now you're facing the consequences. How philosophical, Vanessa replied. But let's not pretend this was purely business. You wanted revenge. Initially, Adrian agreed, though his voice remained resolute. While revenge might have seemed appealing at first, in the end, it amounts to nothing. What I've built with Sinclair Construction holds far more weight than simple vengeance. Vanessa nodded thoughtfully, her gaze contemplative. I didn't understand you fully, she admitted. None of us did. I thought I grasped your goals, but I misjudged their true essence. You didn't pursue power for its own sake. Adrian's reply was steady. No, what I sought was to create something of real worth, something that would last. And you did, she acknowledged, recognizing the truth. Meanwhile, we destroyed everything we had. The two sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. After a few minutes, Vanessa spoke again, breaking the quiet. There's something more you need to know before I leave. Adrian waited, his interest piqued. Rourke wasn't simply embezzling from Mason, she said softly. He was working with someone inside Sinclair, feeding them information and collaborating on market strategies. Adrian's expression hardened. If you're trying to manipulate me again, it's not, she interrupted, her voice firm. I have evidence. She slid a flash drive across the table. It contained email chains, meeting logs, financial transactions, everything linking Rourke to an insider at Sinclair Construction. Why are you telling me this now? Adrian asked, his voice steady. Vanessa met his gaze. Because, despite everything, I owe you this much. And whoever this person is, they're still there, active, ready to betray you just like Rourke betrayed my father. Adrian pocketed the drive, muttering a quiet thank you. Vanessa nodded, stood, and gathered her purse. Goodbye, Adrian. I don't think we'll meet again. As she walked toward the door, Adrian called after her. For what it's worth, I hope you find what you're searching for, wherever that may be. A bittersweet smile touched her lips. What I was looking for was always right in front of me. I just didn't recognize its worth until it was gone. That evening, Adrian went over the files Vanessa had handed him. The evidence was irrefutable and devastating. Someone within Sinclair had been leaking vital information to Hudson Rourke for months. Project details, client communications, financial strategies, all had been passed on to their competitor. The identity of the traitor stunned him even more. Valerie Prasad, the former Mason board member who had been with Sinclair since the very beginning. The woman Adrian had trusted completely, the one who helped build the company from scratch. I can't believe it, Raymond said flatly when Adrian revealed the findings the next morning. Valerie's been with us from the start. She left the Mason board to join Sinclair after cultivating important relationships that helped us succeed, Adrian reminded him. She positioned herself perfectly, trusted by both sides, privy to confidential information. But why? Caleb asked, his eyes scanning the emails. What was her end game? Power, Adrian replied grimly. Valerie never intended to destroy either company. Her goal was always to control both, creating dependencies that would make her indispensable in the long run. A classic power grab, Raymond muttered, resigned to the truth. We never saw it coming because she appeared to sever ties with Mason when she joined us. But she kept covert communication all along, Adrian confirmed. Now, the question is, what do we do about it? The answer came swiftly in the form of a carefully orchestrated confrontation. Adrian called for an executive strategy meeting, summoning the entire leadership team, including Valerie. As the meeting began, he calmly presented the findings from an anonymous source, unveiling a complex web of corporate espionage targeting Sinclair Construction. Someone in this room has been leaking our confidential information to Hudson Rourke, and through him to our competitors, Adrian declared, watching the faces around the table. We have all the documentation, emails, meeting records, financial transactions. The room filled with stunned silence and anxious murmurs. Valerie, however, remained impassive. These are serious accusations, Adrian. What evidence do you have? Valerie Prasad, Adrian said quietly. You joined Sinclair after leaving the Mason board in a very public shift of loyalties. You portrayed yourself as my trusted advisor while secretly undermining everything we worked to build. The room fell into a tense silence. Then Valerie laughed. It was a cold, calculating sound that shifted the entire atmosphere. Well played, Adrian, she said, her tone dripping with admiration. I underestimated your cleverness. Let me guess, Vanessa provided the proof? A final gift before her departure. The source doesn't matter, Adrian responded, his voice unwavering. The evidence is clear. Valerie scanned the room, assessing her colleagues' reactions. Finding no support, she straightened up. You've created something extraordinary here, Adrian. It's worth far more than Mason ever was, more innovative than Bishop could ever dream. I merely ensured that I'd have a place in its future, regardless of which side won. By betraying both sides, Raymond retorted coldly. By playing my cards wisely, Valerie corrected, unfazed. Business isn't personal, gentlemen. It's about positioning yourself to thrive as the power dynamics shift. You're mistaken, Adrian replied firmly. The best business is deeply personal. Success is built on a foundation of trust, integrity, and a shared vision. These are the pillars you failed to understand, and it's the reason you'll never create anything truly meaningful. As security personnel entered to escort Valerie out of the building, it became clear that while legal action would inevitably follow, the immediate danger to Sinclair Construction had been neutralized. Later, as Adrian and Raymond reviewed the situation, the older man slowly shook his head, signaling his quiet disapproval. Let's take a moment to consider what's at stake here, Adrian said thoughtfully. Trust is becoming more and more rare, and as its scarcity grows, so does its value. Not everyone is disloyal, but Caleb's faithfulness has been unwavering from the start. Most of our team shares that loyalty. Raymond nodded in agreement. That's true, but the scars left by betrayal tend to last much longer than the comfort of loyalty's embrace. I suppose this is something you've come to learn the hard way. Adrian smiled faintly, his expression one of recognition. Experience has a way of teaching in the most thorough way possible, and often at a great personal cost, Raymond added. Speaking of costs, we have a serious matter on our hands. Cameron Bishop has missed his last 2 debt payments. The banks are closing in. I know, Adrian responded. Our acquisition team is already preparing an offer for the remaining assets Bishop holds. Raymond raised an eyebrow, intrigued. So, is this your final play? Adrian smiled slightly, his tone measured. Not quite yet. There's still one more move to make. Meanwhile, Bartholomew Mason sat in his modest office, gazing out at the storm clouds gathering over Elliott Bay. At 63, he had anticipated winding down his career, perhaps spending more time with his grandchildren. Instead, he found himself grappling with the monumental task of rebuilding Mason Construction, a company nearly destroyed by a failed merger and Hudson Rourke's embezzlement. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Mr. Mason, your 2-hour appointment has arrived. Bartholomew sighed deeply. Show them in. He turned, expecting the bank representatives who were supposed to discuss restructuring options. Instead, Adrian Bellamy stood in his doorway. Adrian, Bartholomew said, his surprise quickly replaced with suspicion. I didn't expect you. I had a feeling you wouldn't, Adrian replied, stepping into the office without waiting for permission. Your assistant was kind enough to rearrange your schedule after I mentioned the sensitive nature of our meeting. And what exactly is this sensitive matter? Bartholomew asked, not offering a seat. Adrian remained standing, his voice steady. I've secured a controlling stake in Bishop Developers. The deal will close next week. Bartholomew blinked, surprised. Cameron actually sold to you? After everything, Cameron didn't have a choice, Adrian explained. His creditors forced his hand. I made sure I was the buyer, Adrian added. Congratulations, Bartholomew said, his voice flat. I assume you're here to gloat. First my company, now my former partner. Not at all, Adrian corrected him. I'm here to talk about the future of Mason Construction. Bartholomew's eyes narrowed. My company isn't for sale. I'm not offering to buy it, Adrian replied calmly. What I'm suggesting is a partnership. A partnership? Bartholomew echoed, his skepticism clear. With the man who dismantled my merger and exposed my company's vulnerabilities? With the man who helped keep your company from collapsing under fraud? Adrian countered. And someone who has the resources to help restore what was lost? Bartholomew studied him in silence for a long time. Why would you help me now, after everything? Because Mason Construction deserves a chance to survive, Adrian said simply. 3 generations of hard work shouldn't end because of the mistakes of a single generation. By mistakes, you mean? Yours, mine, Vanessa's? There's plenty of blame to go around, Adrian acknowledged. But that's behind us now. I'm focused on the future. Despite himself, Bartholomew felt a spark of curiosity. What exactly are you proposing? A strategic alliance, Adrian explained. Sinclair Construction specializes in commercial development, while Mason focuses on residential and municipal projects. If we combine our strengths, we can offer a comprehensive range of services while maintaining our independence. Separate leadership, separate identities, Bartholomew clarified, and shared resources when it makes strategic sense, Adrian confirmed. And what would my role be in this partnership? Bartholomew asked. You would remain president of Mason Construction with full operational control. I'll provide capital and strategic guidance, but Mason will remain Mason. Bartholomew moved toward his desk, taking a moment to process the unexpected proposal. This doesn't sound like the kind of revenge I'd expect from someone in your position, he observed. Adrian's lips curved into a slight smile. I'm not like most people. No, Bartholomew agreed, his tone softer. You certainly aren't. He studied Adrian more closely, a newfound respect beginning to form. At your age, you remind me of the person I once was, before I lost sight of what really matters. Legacy. It's about creating something that endures long after you're gone. Bartholomew gestured to the framed images on his wall, each showcasing a piece of Mason Construction's history that had played a key role in shaping Seattle's skyline. My grandfather started with residential homes, my father ventured into commercial projects, and I expanded into public infrastructure. Every generation has built upon the legacy laid by the one before. Now that's a legacy worth preserving, Adrian remarked. Yes, Bartholomew responded softly. It truly is. The two men shared a glance, silently understanding the deeper meaning behind the words. Bartholomew then extended his hand. I'll need to go over the details, but I'm definitely interested in principle, he said. Adrian shook his hand, a quiet understanding passing between them. I had a feeling you would be. As Adrian turned to walk away, Bartholomew called after him. Adrian, have you heard from Vanessa? Adrian paused in his steps. Not since she left Seattle. She's in Chicago, Bartholomew said, starting fresh. She still mentions you from time to time when we talk. That chapter is closed for me, Bartholomew, Adrian replied. Is it? Bartholomew asked, his tone carrying a challenge. You've overcome your adversaries, built something extraordinary, and even restored what remained of honor. But have you found peace? Adrian stopped, considering the question deeply. I'm working on it. Good. Bartholomew nodded. That's the most difficult thing to build. The announcement of the merger between Sinclair Construction and Mason Construction sent shockwaves throughout the industry. Analysts praised the strategic alliance's complementary strengths, while business publications highlighted Adrian Bellamy's unorthodox leadership style and sharp strategic insights. Cameron Bishop, who had lost both his company and fortune, left Seattle for a minor consulting position in Dallas. Meanwhile, Hudson Rourke's ongoing embezzlement trial continued to unfold, with each new revelation further tarnishing the reputations of those involved. As for Vanessa, she focused on rebuilding her life far from her past in Chicago. 6 months after the merger, Adrian stood at the podium for the groundbreaking ceremony of Harbor Heights, the first joint project between Sinclair and Mason. As he acknowledged the efforts of both teams, he caught sight of Raymond Sinclair in the front row, a proud look on his face. Later, as they walked through the expansive construction site, Raymond spoke with approval. "This partnership with Mason was a brilliant idea," Raymond said. "The market's response has far exceeded our expectations." "It made sense from a business standpoint," Adrian replied. "And it was the right thing to do." Raymond smiled knowingly. "The personal and professional have aligned perfectly. By the way, Alexander Chen mentioned you've declined his dinner invitations 3 times this month." Adrian raised an eyebrow. "Are you keeping track of my social life now?" Raymond chuckled. "Just noticing that you've built an empire but haven't put much effort into building a personal life. Revenge consumes everything, Adrian. But that's over now. What happens next?" Before Adrian could respond, his phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, a surprised expression crossing his face. "What is it?" Raymond asked. "An invitation," Adrian replied, looking up. "From Vanessa. She's coming back to Seattle next month for a charity event and wants to meet." "Are you going?" Raymond asked. Adrian paused to think. "I'm not sure." "The past doesn't let go until we make peace with it," Raymond remarked. "Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is forgive, not for them, but for yourself." "I'll think about it," Adrian said, putting his phone back in his pocket. "But for now, we have an empire to run." Raymond gave him a firm pat on the back. "Indeed, and you've done an exceptional job of it." As they continued their walk, Adrian's mind lingered on Vanessa's invitation. The anger that had driven him for so long was slowly beginning to fade. Not quite forgiveness, but perhaps understanding. Everyone had made their choices, and everyone had paid their price. Perhaps it was finally time to close that chapter for good. That evening, from the tranquility of his penthouse, overlooking the city he had helped reshape, Adrian composed a response to Vanessa's invitation. "Yes, we should talk. Some stories deserve a proper ending." The Emerald City Gala, Seattle's premier charity event, brought together the city's business and social elite to support environmental causes. Adrian arrived punctually, navigating the crowd with brief, polite exchanges. His destination was the West Terrace, where Vanessa had asked to meet before the formal dinner. There he found her standing alone, gazing out at the city skyline as the sunset painted the buildings in hues of amber and gold. She turned when she heard his approach, and for a moment he was taken aback by how both familiar and changed she seemed. She still held herself with grace and poise, but there was now a quiet strength about her, replacing the intensity she once had. Adrian approached her gently, his voice steady and composed. "I appreciate you meeting with me," he said. His gaze lingered on her, noting how well she seemed. "You appear to be doing well," he remarked with a hint of admiration from a respectful distance. She offered him a faint smile. "Chicago has been good to me," she answered. "It felt like the right moment for a new chapter." "I can relate to that," he replied thoughtfully. "Your father mentioned you're now involved in a foundation dedicated to preserving architectural heritage." She nodded, acknowledging his observation. "Yes, it's focused on historic preservation," she clarified. "It feels meaningful, saving valuable pieces of the past rather than just building more and more." "It seems fitting for you," Adrian noted, impressed. "It's an unexpected turn, though." Vanessa's gaze met his, her expression contemplative. "People often surprise you," she said quietly. "Sometimes they surprise themselves, too." The two fell into a brief silence, both gazing out at the city skyline, lost in their thoughts. After a moment, Vanessa spoke again. "I've been following your journey," she confessed. "The Sinclair-Mason alliance, the Bishop acquisition, the Harbor Heights project, everything you've done. You've truly become what I always knew you could." Adrian added, "There's one key difference." She smiled faintly. I did it the right way, she said, acknowledging the silent rebuke with a slight nod. You're right, she admitted. I deserved that. But why did you want to see me, Adrian? Turning to face him completely, she asked. We've both moved forward, but some stories need closure. They can't just be left unresolved. His gaze met hers, steady and unwavering. That's a line you would use, she continued. Our story ended in betrayal and revenge. I thought we could rewrite that ending, Adrian said, his voice soft but determined. What kind of ending do you have in mind? She asked, intrigued. Closure, Vanessa answered simply. Recognizing the wrongs, acknowledging that the past can't be changed, but that doesn't mean it should control our future. Adrian studied her closely, trying to detect any hidden agenda. When he saw none, he softened, his expression more open. You've changed, he remarked. Failure has a way of teaching you a lot, she said quietly. Losing everything, wealth, status, reputation, brings clarity. It makes you realize what really matters and what's worth fighting for. Truth, integrity, and rebuilding, she added, her voice steady. I've stopped hiding behind manipulation or tactics. She looked directly into his eyes. I won't ask for forgiveness, Adrian. What I did to you can't be undone or forgiven. But I want you to know that I see it now, she continued. I see the betrayal for what it was, and the pain it caused. Adrian nodded slightly, moved by her sincerity. Thank you for that, he said. Just then, the event coordinator signaled that dinner was about to begin. Vanessa glanced toward the crowd, noticing the gathering for dinner. Would you escort me in? She asked. One last public appearance together, this time with no hidden agendas. Adrian offered his arm, a silent but powerful gesture of closure. As they entered the ballroom, all eyes turned toward them. Whispers quickly spread throughout the room. The once powerful couple, now separated by divorce and scandal, walking in together stirred quite a reaction. Vanessa tensed beside him, but then relaxed, as if making a conscious decision. The gossip will start right away, she murmured. Let them, Adrian replied calmly. It doesn't matter anymore. When they reached the dining area, they parted ways, each heading to a different table. Before leaving his side, Vanessa squeezed his hand once. Be happy, Adrian. You've earned it. The evening unfolded with speeches, awards, and fundraising appeals. Adrian engaged with the crowd politely, but remained somewhat detached until Raymond Sinclair took the stage for a surprise announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, Raymond began, your generosity tonight has been extraordinary, but I have one final request. The room hushed. Curiosity piqued. Raymond continued. The Harbor Heights development includes plans for a 30-acre public park along the waterfront. I propose that this park be named in honor of Seattle's greatest architectural visionaries, past, present, and future. The Mason-Sinclair Park will stand as a symbol of what we can achieve when we choose collaboration over competition and legacy over short-term gains. The audience erupted into applause. Adrian, caught off guard, suddenly found himself the center of attention as Raymond gestured toward him. From across the room, he exchanged a silent toast with Bartholomew Mason, who raised his glass in acknowledgement. Adrian returned the gesture with a subtle nod. As the evening wound down, Adrian found himself on the terrace, joined by Raymond. You really caught me off guard with that announcement, Adrian remarked, though his tone was not unkind. A little strategic surprise, Raymond replied with a smile. I learned that move from you. The Mason before Sinclair. That was intentional, an alphabetical choice. Raymond's smile widened, a hint of innocence in his expression. But I'm also aware of the symbolism. Some wounds need to be healed publicly. Adrian chuckled softly, despite himself. And here I thought I was the one known for strategic genius, he said. Raymond shifted his tone to something more serious. Speaking of strategy, he began, I heard from Alexander Chen. Triad Holdings is contemplating a major restructuring. They're seeking new leadership, someone with vision and a proven track record. Do you think you might be interested? Raymond spoke with careful deliberation, his words measured and thoughtful. It appears you've accomplished everything you set out to do. Sinclair Construction has risen to the top of the industry. You've been instrumental in Mason's recovery, and you've effectively neutralized Bishop as a competitor. Now the real question is, what challenges are left that could truly match your talents? Adrian paused for a moment, mulling over Raymond's words. Are you suggesting I leave Seattle and start somewhere new? What I'm suggesting, Raymond clarified, is that you think about what truly fulfills you. Is it the act of building, or is it the challenge of transformation? Taking something broken and turning it into something extraordinary. Before Adrian could respond, his gaze shifted to Vanessa, who was leaving the ballroom with a small group of Chicago associates. She caught his eye for a brief moment, an unspoken understanding passing between them before she disappeared into the night. Adrian turned back to Raymond. I had a conversation with her earlier. It was revealing. Revealing how? Raymond asked. The anger that had fueled me for so long, Adrian confessed. It's gone. Not forgotten, but processed. It's over. Raymond nodded quietly, his approval evident. The greatest form of revenge isn't in destruction, but in transcendence. Moving beyond the wrongs and building something better in their place. That's rather philosophical for a billionaire developer, Adrian remarked, a slight smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. I prefer to think of it as wise reflection, Raymond replied, returning the smile. So what's next for you, Adrian Bellamy? Seattle's been conquered. The world is yours. Adrian surveyed the city he had shaped, the towering Sinclair construction projects rising in the skyline, his collaboration with Mason moving forward, the future park bearing both their names. He had arrived in Seattle 3 years earlier, an ambitious outsider, only to be shattered by betrayal, yet emerged stronger, more resilient, and truer to the man he had become. I'm not sure yet, he said, shrugging. But for the first time in years, uncertainty feels more liberating than daunting. Raymond gave him a firm pat on the shoulder, his eyes shining with pride. That, my friend, is the true victory, not overcoming Bishop or Mason, or even your past. It's having the freedom to shape your future on your own terms. 2 months later, Adrian stood in his nearly empty penthouse, his belongings packed and ready to be sent out. The breathtaking view of Seattle would soon be someone else's. He had accepted an offer to become CEO of Triad Holdings, with headquarters in Singapore, where he would oversee their entire Asia-Pacific development portfolio. Caleb Redding leaned against the doorframe, watching his mentor prepare for this next chapter of his life. So, this is it, Caleb said, disbelief in his voice. You're really going. New challenges, Adrian replied. New beginnings. Sinclair Construction won't be the same without you, Caleb remarked. It'll be better, Adrian replied confidently. You're ready to lead. You've been ready for a while now. Caleb shook his head. Following in the footsteps of the Adrian Bellamy era won't be easy. Then don't follow, Adrian said with a knowing smile. Create your own path. That's what leadership is all about. A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Adrian opened it to find Bartholomew Mason standing there, looking somewhat uncomfortable. I heard you were leaving today, Bartholomew said. I thought I should come by and say goodbye properly. Adrian motioned for him to come in, and the 3 men stood in an awkward silence before Bartholomew spoke again. I want you to know what you've built here, what we've rebuilt together. It matters. The Sinclair-Mason alliance has set a new standard for the industry. It was the right solution, Adrian replied simply. Bartholomew nodded. Yes, it was, More right than anything I've done in years." He extended his hand. "Thank you, Adrian, for seeing beyond revenge and seeking redemption." Adrian shook his hand firmly. "Take care of the legacy, Bartholomew. It's worth preserving." Once Bartholomew left, Caleb glanced at his watch. The car's downstairs, ready to go. Adrian took one last look around the space that had witnessed his transformation, from a betrayed man to an industry leader. "Yes," he said, finally feeling peace with the moment. "I'm ready." As they descended in the elevator, Caleb asked the question Adrian had expected. "Have you told Vanessa you're leaving?" "Yes," Adrian replied. "We had dinner last week when she was in town." Caleb raised an eyebrow but chose not to comment. The truth was more complicated than Adrian wanted to explain. His last conversation with Vanessa hadn't been about closure or reconciliation. It had been about acknowledging that people change, that pain can drive transformation, and that some connections, no matter the circumstances, never completely fade. "She wished me well," Adrian said quietly, "and I did the same for her." The lobby was still as they crossed to the waiting car. Outside, Seattle's usual drizzle had given way to a rare burst of sunshine, a moment of beauty to savor. "Perfect weather for new beginnings," Caleb remarked as they loaded Adrian's final bags into the car. Adrian looked up at the building that had once been his home, then out at the city he had helped reshape. "Every ending makes way for something new," he said, a mix of finality and hope in his voice. "I have finally come to understand the truth." As the car moved away from the curb, Adrian didn't look back. The thirst for vengeance that had once consumed his every thought had now shifted into something far more valuable. He realized that true achievement wasn't about vanquishing enemies, but about building something that could never be torn down. His victory wasn't forged through revenge, but through the power of creation. In Singapore, a new chapter awaited him, fresh opportunities, unexplored paths, and the potential to create something truly significant. The future stretched out before him, unburdened by the past that had once controlled his every decision. A smile crossed Adrian Bellamy's lips. It was the moment to embrace a new beginning. Our story comes to an end here. Share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for taking the time to watch. If you enjoyed this story, please check out other videos on this channel. See you soon, my dear friend.